Why has it been almost impossible to build a single road connecting North and South America? This is where the journey begins. Welcome to the Darién Gap, a wild, lawless strip of land where if you go in, you might get kidnapped, or simply disappear. Here lies the narrow bridge of Earth that physically joins two massive continents, North America and South America, yet divides them completely in every other way. Despite being connected by land, no country, not even the United States of America, with all its power and money, has ever managed to build a highway or bridge across this region. Billions of dollars have been poured into it, but this remains one of the biggest failed infrastructure dreams in modern history. It all started back in 1923, inside a closed-door meeting in Washington, D.C., where top diplomats from the U.S. and Latin America imagined an audacious dream. A single highway that could take you from the frozen tip of Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, all the way down to the icy edge of Tierra del Fuego, Argentina, the literal end of the world. Ambitious? Definitely. Impossible? Maybe not. But the Darién Gap had other plans. For the next 60 years, engineers pushed the limits of human endurance. They cut through mountains, built bridges across raging rivers, laid highways through deserts, and where the land ended, they used boats and ferries to keep the dream alive. It took 6 long decades to turn that vision into reality. And today, we know it as the Pan-American Highway, a 30,000-kilometer road stretching across 7 climates, 14 countries, and 2 entire continents. But here's the shocking part. Even after 100 years, this massive American dream is still incomplete. Because the road that connects Alaska to Argentina stops right here at a small 100-kilometer stretch of jungle known as the Darién Gap. This is the exact point where North America meets South America, and yet, where the dream of a continuous highway completely breaks apart. Let's see it in real time. If you open Google Maps, set your starting point to Yavisa, Panama, and your destination to Turbo, Colombia, what route do you get? None. Just one cold message. Can't seem to find a way there. That's because this highway, which runs nearly 19,000 miles from Alaska to Argentina, comes to a dead stop in Yavisa, Panama, and only resumes again in Turbo, Colombia. The missing piece between them, the Darién Gap. From above it looks like just a dense green jungle. But what makes this small patch of land so impossible to cross? Because this is no ordinary forest. For over 400 years, no empire, no country, not even the most powerful colonial forces, have ever managed to conquer it. Scotland, America, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, even Russia. For centuries they all tried, and failed. When the map of the Americas looked like a vast, untamed land, no empire, not even the mightiest of them, ever managed to touch this small stretch of jungle known as the Darién Gap. Back in 1690, Spain and Portugal were planting their flags across the world. England and France were expanding their colonies at record speed. The Dutch controlled the richest trade networks on Earth. But Scotland was falling behind. Then in 1698, a Scottish visionary named William Paterson came up with an idea that could change everything. A secret colony. A new trading empire built in the one place untouched by any empire, the Darién Gap. With a budget of £400,000, a massive sum for that time, over 25,000 Scots left their homeland in search of a new beginning. But within just a few months, the Darién showed its true face. Tropical diseases, starvation, isolation. The jungle swallowed them whole. Only a handful survived to return home. The rest were lost forever in the merciless land of Darién. And the dream that was supposed to make Scotland a global financial power instead bankrupted the nation. Within a few years, Scotland had no choice but to merge with England, and from that disaster, the United Kingdom was born. But the tragedy of the Scots didn't stop anyone from trying again. In 1854, the United States decided to test its own luck. Lieutenant Isaac Strain of the U.S. Navy led a team of 27 men deep into the Darién jungle. Their mission, to find out if a road or a canal could ever be built here. But within days, the jungle began to fight back. Men went missing. Others were found wounded, delirious, and dying. 7 bodies were discovered, so brutally disfigured that the rescuers could barely look. After 49 days, Lieutenant Strain was finally rescued, barely alive, unable to speak. He uttered only one haunting line: "Darién is utterly impractical, impossible to conquer." Centuries earlier, the Spanish Empire had faced the same nightmare. They were the first to colonize the Americas. But within 5 years of entering the Darién, even they abandoned it. Look at this 1794 map of the Americas. The British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, even the Russians, they all had their colonies spread across the continent. And yet, right in the middle of it all, one small blank space remained untouched: the Darién Gap. It was a nightmare for every empire then, and it still is today. When it comes to border history, the Darién Gap remains one of America's greatest failures. By 1950, the U.S. had drawn up a complete blueprint for a road across the gap. President Richard Nixon even allocated $149 million to fund the construction. He was so confident that he publicly announced, "By 1976, a highway will finally connect the Americas." But what made the U.S. so sure this time? Because if the conventional plan failed, America already had a secret, highly controversial Plan B. The United States called it Project Plowshare. Under this project, America struck an unbelievable deal with Panama. If the terrain of the Darién Gap couldn't be cut open by machines, they would do it with nuclear bombs. Yes, the plan was to detonate 325 nuclear explosions to carve a 100-kilometer-long trench connecting North and South America. Their logic was simple: if nature wouldn't cooperate, technology would force it to obey. But this insane idea came with an even darker irony. The U.S. claimed it would be a peaceful nuclear experiment, a demonstration of how atomic energy could help build instead of destroy. Yet, deep down, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't about unity or engineering. It was about control. Control over trade, over geopolitics, and over the entire hemisphere. In the end, the project was quietly shut down. Scientists warned that detonating hundreds of nukes would permanently poison the rainforest, wipe out entire ecosystems, and possibly trigger earthquakes across Central America. The peaceful nuclear highway was buried before the first blast could ever happen. Now, let's get back to America's alternate plan to nuke the Darién Gap. Fortunately, that plan never had to be executed, but under President Nixon's orders, the U.S. sent one of its best. Angelo Giuliano, chief engineer at the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads, and winner of the Engineer of the Year award from the National Society of Professional Engineers. Giuliano and his team had a simple mission: to cut through the dense jungles running parallel to the Pacific coastline and reach Colombia. Sounds simple, right? But the moment they stepped into that forest, they met their first enemy: the rivers, raging, unpredictable, and wild. Every few kilometers, they were forced to cross another river, Not calm, peaceful streams, but violent torrents, crashing with the same fury as the Ganges during monsoon season. And it wasn't just one river. The entire Darién region is cut through by more than 100 raging rivers. Crossing them is nearly impossible. To put that into perspective, just 5 years earlier, in 1960, National Geographic sent an expedition into the same jungle. They had to build 125 temporary bridges just to get one single vehicle across. And even then, it took them 101 days to cross those 100 rivers. That's literally one river a day. But for Angelo and his team, the real challenge was just getting started. This region receives over 4,000 millimeters of rain every year. That's twice as much as Mumbai, and not for 4 months like the Indian monsoon, but for 9 straight months. That meant the engineers had only a tiny 3-month window to even attempt their survey. And even during that short period, the ground was so soaked and muddy that a person's legs would sink knee-deep with every step. The wet terrain also created a perfect breeding ground for mosquito-borne diseases. Deadly ones like malaria and yellow fever. In fact, over 250 members of Angelo's crew were infected during the mission. The Darién Gap was, and still is, a malaria hotspot. And Angelo had no way to bypass it. On both sides stood massive mountain ranges, leaving the team with just one option: push straight through the heart of the jungle. Fighting through these brutal conditions, the engineers finally reached the center of the Darién, crossing into Panamanian territory. When they arrived at a place called Pavón de Letra, they thought the worst was over. But they were wrong. They believed the path ahead would be just as challenging as before. And that's when Angelo came up with a bold idea: to build the longest bridge in the world across the Darién Gap. He was so confident, he even designed the blueprint himself. But Angelo was still underestimating the Darién. Because this jungle, like a two-faced coin, changed its entire nature the moment they crossed Pavón de Letra. And what stood before them now was something far more dangerous. The massive Atrato River basin, a swamp so deep it could swallow anything. Still, Angelo didn't give up. He figured, if I can't go around it, maybe I can build through it. So he decided to measure the swamp's depth by dropping concrete-filled barrels into it. But to his shock, the barrels sank straight down, 300 feet deep. That's roughly the height of a 30-story building, completely disappearing beneath the mud. At that point, the bridge plan was doomed, and a highway. Out of the question, the ground was so soft that asphalt couldn't even hold together. One heavy rain or storm, and the entire road would vanish into the swamp. This geography alone was enough to kill the dream of connecting the Pan-American Highway through the Darién Gap. Towering mountains, over 100 rivers, deep swamps, venomous snakes, scorpions, mosquitoes, and deadly predators like jaguars and crocodiles. Surviving here for more than a few months was nearly impossible. And yet, despite all this, small American research teams kept venturing into the region, determined to study what others feared to even approach. Until 1975, when the United States was finally forced to halt the Pan-American Highway project. The reason? A massive outbreak of foot and mouth disease had spread across South America. This viral infection caused painful red blisters on the mouths and feet of livestock, cattle, goats, sheep, and pigs, drastically cutting down meat and milk production. But what made it truly terrifying was how easily it spread. Through soil, grass, water, even air, jumping from one animal to another in no time. If even a single cow got infected, it could wipe out an entire farm's livestock. The only way to contain it was mass slaughter, killing off thousands of animals to stop the chain of infection. Now imagine this. If a direct road connected South America and North America through the Darién Gap, the virus could have spread north and destroyed the entire U.S. livestock economy. So, in 1975, the U.S. Supreme Court stepped in and officially placed a 20-year suspension on the project. And in those 20 years, everything changed, especially the political atmosphere of the region. When discussions to revive the highway finally began, the indigenous Embera-Wunan tribes rose up in protest. They argued that if a road was built through the Darién, it would destroy their rivers, forests, and ancient culture forever. They refused to let any foreign influence enter their sacred land. In fact, one tribal leader, Fabio Chamapuro, went so far as to accuse the government of committing mass genocide against his people through this project. Over time, these tribal protests gained enormous strength, so much that not just local groups, but even major global institutions like the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank began supporting them. Under massive international and political pressure, funding for the project started to dry up, and eventually the Darién Gap project was officially frozen once again. But here's the strange part. Even though the U.S. had once called this its dream project, it didn't seem to fight very hard to keep it alive in court. And let's be honest, this is the United States we're talking about. Could a few tribal protests and a 100-kilometer stretch of jungle really stop America? After all, this is the same country that pushed through Iran's oil deals, backed Panama's independence, fought the Vietnam War, and invaded Iraq, all in the name of national interest. So why would they suddenly back off here, at the Darién Gap? Well, by that time, America's interest in the project was quietly fading. Because by the mid-1970s, the U.S. had already created a much bigger problem in South America, one that made keeping the Darién Gap closed far more convenient. That problem was the cocaine epidemic. By the early 1980s, the entire world was trembling under its impact, and the biggest twist in this crisis was America's own double face. Publicly, the U.S. claimed it was fighting a war against the cocaine trade, but behind the scenes, allegations pointed toward the CIA itself, accused of working with U.S. military operations to secretly fuel the same drug network they claimed to be stopping. By 1972, Colombian gangs had already seized complete control of the cocaine trade, turning Colombia into the world's sole producer